The room went silent the moment I opened my mouth, and then the laughter began. I stood on a raised platform in the great hall of the Galactic Concord, and 300 species looked down at me from their floating seats. My name is Elias Vance, and I was the first human ever chosen to speak for our entire world. I had practiced my speech for weeks. I had picked my words with great care. And now, before I had finished my third sentence, the whole chamber was shaking with the strange clicks and hums and whistles that passed for laughter among the stars. I kept my face calm. I had learned to do that. "Forgive us, little human," said the delegate from the Valthari, a tall being with skin like polished glass and eyes that glowed soft blue. His name was Vorik, and he was the most respected voice in the Concord. "We do not mean to wound you, but you must understand how your words sound to us. You speak of your history as if it were a treasure. You offer us stories of small bands of your people, standing against impossible numbers. You offer us tales of broken ships limping home through the dark. You call these things glory. We call them poor planning." The laughter rose again, gentle but endless. I gripped the edge of the platform. Humanity had joined the Concord only 30 years before. We were the youngest species in the room by far. We had no faster-than-light weapons worth fear. We had no power of the mind like the Sanet, who could move mountains with a thought. We had no bodies grown in tanks to be perfect like the Dre. We were soft, slow, and short-lived. When we arrived among the stars, the great old species had expected us to bring something useful. Instead, we had brought our past, our legends, our endless library of moments when humans had refused to lie down and die. And the galaxy thought it was the funniest thing they had ever heard. "Your ancestors crossed frozen seas in wooden boats," Vorik went on, almost kindly. "They climbed mountains with no reason but to say they had done it. They flew machines held together by hope and string. Why? What sane creature risks everything for so little?" He spread his long hands. "We do not fight when we cannot win, human. We calculate. We survive by knowing when to stop. This is wisdom. Your stories are charming, but they are the songs of a species that has not yet learned to count." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that he had it backwards. But I needed the Concord. Earth needed the Concord. We were weak, and the protection of the old species was the only thing keeping our small worlds safe. So I bowed my head and let them laugh. And I told myself it did not matter. I was wrong. It mattered very much. The alarm came 2 hours later, while I was still in my quarters trying to scrub the shame off my skin. It did not come as a loud blare. The Concord was far too refined for that. It came as a soft chime, and then every screen in the station turned the same shade of pale gray. I had never seen that color before, but somehow my body knew to be afraid of it before my mind caught up. I walked back into the great hall. The laughter was gone now. Every delegate sat frozen, staring at the enormous window that filled one wall. Beyond the glass, the long-range arrays of the Concord were showing us something at the very edge of the galaxy, far out past the rim where the stars grew thin. At first I thought it was a cloud of dust, a great dark smear across the field of stars, slowly turning, slowly spreading. Then the image grew sharper, and I understood that the smear was not dust at all. It was ships. There were so many of them that they blotted out the light behind them. Not hundreds, not thousands. The count kept climbing on the screen, faster than I could read it, and then it simply stopped trying to count and showed a symbol instead, a symbol I did not know. "That symbol," I said to the Sanet delegate beside me, a quiet being who floated in a tank of pale liquid. "What does it mean?" The Sanet did not answer for a long moment. When it finally spoke, its voice came out flat and small. "It means the number cannot be measured," it said. "It means there is no end to them." Vorik rose slowly from his seat. All the calm pride had drained out of him. His glass skin had gone dull. He stared at the dark tide on the screen as though he were looking at a ghost. "It is not possible," he whispered. "They are a story. They are something we tell our young so they will fear the dark. They are not real." "What is not real?" I asked. "What are they?" He turned to me, and for the first time since I had met him, the great Valthari delegate looked at me as an equal. Not a joke, not a child. Just another living thing standing in the path of something terrible. "The Devourers," he said. "In our oldest records, before we had cities, before we had ships, there are warnings. A fleet that crosses between galaxies. A fleet that does not speak, does not trade, does not stop. It arrives, it strips a galaxy of everything that lives, and it moves on to the next. We thought it was a fear our ancestor invented. A shadow on the wall." He looked back at the screen. "We were wrong. I felt the floor seem to drop away beneath me. All around the hall, the great old species, the ones who had laughed at me an hour before, were beginning to make sounds I had never heard from them. Soft sounds, frightened sounds. The image on the great window kept growing. The dark fleet did not rush. It did not hurry. It simply came, slow and certain, like a tide that has all the time in the world because it knows nothing can hold it back. "How fast are they moving?" someone asked. The answer came from the station itself, calm and cold. At their current speed, the leading edge of the Devourer Armada will reach the first inhabited systems of the Concord in approximately 40 years. 40 years. I almost laughed myself then. To these old species, 40 years was nothing, a breath, the blink of an eye. They lived for thousands of years. Some of them, 40 years was barely time enough to finish a meal and a long conversation. But to me, 40 years was most of a human life. To me, 40 years was a child being born, growing up, and becoming a parent. To me, 40 years was long enough to do something. I did not say that out loud. Not yet. I only stood there with the rest of them and watched the dark thing come. And I felt the laughter of that afternoon turn to ash in my memory. Vorik came to stand beside me. We watched the screen together in silence. After a while he spoke, and his voice was very quiet. Your stories, he said. The ones we mocked, the small bands, the hopeless stands, the broken ships that came home anyway. He paused. How did those stories end, human? I thought about it. I thought about every tale I had brought to the stars, every account I had carried in our archives, hoping the great species would see some worth in us. Most of them, I said slowly, the people in those stories were not supposed to survive. The numbers were against them. The odds said they had already lost. Everyone watching expected them to fall. And what happened? I looked at him. For the first time all day, I did not feel small. Some of them won anyway, I said, and the ones who did not win, they made the cost of beating them so high that no one ever forgot their names. Vorik was quiet for a long time. The dark fleet turned slowly on the great window, vast beyond counting, patient beyond fear. 40 years, he said at last. Tell me, Elias Vance, in all your long human history, in all those foolish stories we laughed at this afternoon, did your people ever face something like this and choose to fight? I did not answer right away, because the honest answer frightened me almost as much as the fleet did. The honest answer was yes. Again and again, all through our short and stubborn history, humans had stood in front of things far larger than themselves and refused to step aside. We had done it when it made no sense. We had done it when every wise voice told us to run. I was beginning to understand, the one thing we had always been good at. The one thing the galaxy had laughed at us for. The one thing that, just maybe, none of these great and ancient species knew how to do anymore. Yes, I told him. We did, more times than I can count. He nodded slowly. And something flickered behind his glass eyes. It was not hope. It was too early for hope. But it was the first crack in the wall of fear that had fallen over the hall. Then perhaps, he said, your stories were not jokes after all. Perhaps they were a kind of training, a memory your whole species kept alive without knowing why. He turned to face me fully. We may need to learn that memory, human, and we may not have very long to learn it. Around us, the hall began to come back to life. Delegates spoke in low, urgent voices. Screens lit up with charts and numbers. The great machine of the Concord was waking from its shock and beginning, in its slow and careful way, to think. But I already knew what they would find when they finished thinking. I could feel it in my chest like a cold stone. These were beings who survived by counting, by knowing when to stop, by never fighting a battle they could not win. They were about to point all their great wisdom at the dark fleet on the screen. And the wisdom was going to tell them something they were not ready to hear. It was going to tell them they had already lost. And when that moment came, when every clever mind in the galaxy threw up its hands and agreed that nothing could be done, there would be exactly one species in the room that had spent its entire history refusing to accept that answer. I looked up at the dark tide spreading across the stars, endless and silent and sure of itself, and for the first time in 30 years among the great old species, I did not feel small at all. I felt like the only one in the room who knew what came next. The laughter had stopped. Now the real story was about to begin, and this time, no one was going to find it funny. It took the Concord 11 days to finish counting, and when they were done, they gathered every delegate in the Great Hall to hear the answer. I already knew it would be bad. I had spent those 11 days watching the faces of the old species grow tighter and grayer with each passing hour, but I was not ready for how bad it truly was. The chief strategist of the Concord was a being called Ultherin, of the Dre, the species who grew their bodies to be perfect and their minds to be cold and clear. Ultherin floated above the platform where I had stood and been laughed at less than 2 weeks before. Now no one was laughing. Now the whole hall held its breath. We have run the simulation, Ultherin began. We have run it 9 million times. We have given our machines every weapon we possess, every ship, every mind, every trick of war that the Concord has gathered across 100,000 years. It paused. In every single outcome, all life in this galaxy ends within 40 years. There is no version where we survive. The Devourers cannot be stopped. They cannot be slowed in any way that matters. They cannot be reasoned with because they do not speak. They take everything. And they move on. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I have ever felt. What do you suggest? Vorik asked. His voice was steady. But I had learned to read the Velthari now, and I could see the strains in the set of his shoulders. There is only one rational path, Ultherin said. We do not waste our final years on a fight we cannot win. We use the time we have to preserve what we can. We build vessels of sleep, great arcs where a chosen few of each species may rest, frozen and hidden, and drift out into the empty dark between galaxies. Perhaps the devourers will pass us by. Perhaps in 10,000 years, our descendants will wake and find a galaxy stripped bare but quiet, and begin again. Ultherin's cold eyes swept the hall. It is not survival of our worlds, but it is survival of something. It is the wise choice. And the terrible thing was, the hall agreed. I watched it happen. I watched the greatest minds in the galaxy nod and murmur, and accept it. One by one, the delegates began to speak of how many of their people could fit in the sleeping arcs. They began to argue, in calm and reasonable voices, about which of their colonies were too far away to save, and would simply have to be left behind. They spoke of worlds with billions of living souls as numbers to be crossed off a list. I sat through hours of it. I listened to a delegate from a 1,000-year-old civilization explain, without a single crack in his voice, that his outer colonies would be told the truth and given the means to end their own waiting peacefully, rather than face the dark fleet. He called it mercy. He called it dignity. He called it the kind thing to do. I could not sit through any more. I rose from my seat. I was not scheduled to speak. By the rules of the Concord, a young species like mine had no right to interrupt the great old voices. But I stood up anyway, and I walked to the platform, and I climbed onto it, and the whole hall turned to stare at the foolish little human who did not know his place. You are all wrong, I said. Ultherin's cold eyes fixed on me. Explain, human. Our mathematics is perfect. Where is the error? There is no error in your mathematics, I said. The error is in the question you asked. You asked your machines how to win. They told you that you cannot win, so you stopped. But winning was never the only reason to fight. A ripple of that old laughter moved through the hall, but it was thin now, hollow. It was the laughter of people who wanted very badly to believe I was a fool, because the other choice was too frightening to face. You laughed at our stories, I went on, and my voice grew stronger. You laughed at the small bands who stood against great armies. You laughed at the broken ships that came home through the dark. You said they were poor planning. You said they were the songs of a species that could not count. I looked out at all of them, at the glass and the metal and the strange, beautiful shapes of 300 kinds of life. But every one of those stories had something in common, and not one of you understood it. They were never stories about winning. They were stories about what you do when the counting is finished and the answer is no. The hall was silent now. Really silent. Even Ultherin said nothing. You think the choice is between a clever surrender and a foolish death, I said. You are wrong. There is a third thing, and my species has been doing it for our entire history. When the odds say you have already lost, you make them pay for every step. You fight not because you will win, but because the things behind you are worth more than the fear in front of you. You buy time with your own stubbornness. You break the plan of the thing that is too big to break. And sometimes, just sometimes, you find out that the answer the machines gave you was not as certain as they thought. And if you are wrong, Ultherin asked quietly, if the fight is hopeless after all, then you have simply died sooner and wasted the years you could have spent preserving something. Then we die standing up, I said, instead of lying down, and every species that comes after us, every life that ever crawls out of the dark in 10,000 years, will know that when the end came, someone refused to bow to it. I took a breath. But I do not think we are wrong. Your machines ran 9 million simulations and never once found a way to win. Do you know why? Because your machines only know how your kinds of war work. They modeled clever creatures, fighting clever creatures. They never once modeled what happens when something faces an enemy that fights like a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. Your machines do not know how to count that, because none of you have ever been that animal. Vorik rose slowly from his seat. The whole hall watched the most respected voice in the Concord get to his feet beside the youngest and weakest species in the room. He is right about one thing, Vorik said. Our machines modeled ourselves. They never modeled them. He gestured toward me. I have read their archives these past 11 days. I could not stop reading them. There is something in their history that none of us possess. They have failed over and over and refused to learn the lesson of failure. They have lost and stood up to lose again. And in doing so, they have become the only kind of creature in this galaxy that does not break when the answer is no. He turned to the hall. I do not know if it can save us, but I know that nothing in our mathematics can save us either. And given the choice between a clever death in a sleeping arc and a chance, however small, I would rather take the chance. It is not a chance, Ultherin said. It is a feeling. You cannot fight an endless armada with a feeling. Perhaps not, I said. So we will not ask the Concord to fight, not yet. Earth will not demand your fleets or your weapons. We know you do not believe in us. We have spent 30 years being your joke, and I do not expect that to change in 11 days. I looked at Ultherin, at Vorik, at all of them. But you have written off the far colonies. The ones too distant to save, the ones you plan to leave behind to face the dark alone. I am asking for those. Give us the worlds you have already given up on. Let us go to them. Let us stand on the ground you were ready to abandon. And let us show you what my species does when the counting is finished. The hall erupted. Some delegates called it madness. Some called it a waste of the few years we had left. Some, the colder ones, simply did not care what the humans did with their final years, as long as it did not cost the Concord anything. But in the end, that very coldness won the argument for me. Because the far colonies were already lost in their eyes, already crossed off the list. If the foolish little humans wanted to go and die on worlds that were going to die anyway, what did it cost the Concord to let them? So they agreed. Not out of hope, out of indifference. They handed us the worlds they had already buried, and they expected to never hear from us again. I did not care why they said yes, I only cared that they had. That night I sent the message home to Earth. I did not dress it up. I did not soften it. I told my people the truth, all of it. The Dark Fleet, the 40 years, the 9 million simulations that all ended the same way. And then I told them what I had asked for, and what the Concord had granted, and I asked them a single question. Would they come? I did not have to wait long for the answer. It came back faster than any message in the history of our short time among the stars. And it did not come from a government, or a council, or a fleet command. It came from people, volunteers, tens of thousands of them in the first day. Hundreds of thousands in the first week. Pilots and engineers and doctors and farmers and ordinary people with no training at all who simply could not stand the thought of letting those far colonies, full of living beings who had laughed at us only weeks before, face the dark alone. They did not ask if we could win. Almost none of them asked that. They asked only one thing, again and again, in 1,000 different ways. Where do we go, and when do we leave? I read those messages until my eyes burned, and somewhere in the middle of that long night, I understood something that the Concord, with all its mathematics, would never have been able to calculate. The old species had asked how to win, and when the answer was no, they had stopped. My species had never bothered to ask the question at all. A woman named Ruth Daly was the first to reach the staging point. She was a freight captain from one of our outer colonies. With 20 years of hauling ore between dead rocks and no military training whatsoever, her ship was old and slow and patched in a dozen places. She brought it to the meeting point 3 days ahead of anyone else, and when I asked her why she had come so fast, she gave me a look that I will remember until the day I die. Because you said someone has to go stand on the worlds they gave up on, she said. And I have spent my whole life being someone nobody counted on. I figure I am exactly the right kind of person for a job like that. Behind her, over the next 2 weeks came the rest. Not a grand fleet of gleaming warships. A ragged tide of freighters and mining vessels and old passenger liners. Every one of them carrying people who had decided, freely and without being ordered, to spend whatever years they had left, standing between an endless darkness and the worlds the galaxy had abandoned. Vorik came to watch them gather. He stood beside me at the great window and looked out at the strange, ugly, beautiful fleet of human volunteers assembling in the dark. They are not soldiers, he said. Most of them have never held a weapon. Their ships are not built for war. By every measure I know, this is hopeless. I know, I said, and they came anyway. They came anyway. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that I had never expected to hear from a Velthari. And certainly never from him. Our records are wrong about your species, he said. We wrote that you could not count, but that is not true. You count perfectly well. You simply count different things than we do. We count the odds. You count the worlds behind you. He turned from the window to look at me. I would like to come with you, Elias Vance, to one of these abandoned worlds. I would like to see, with my own eyes, what it is your stories have been trying to teach us all along. I looked at the most respected voice in the Galactic Concord, the being who had laughed at me on my first day, now asking to follow a ragtag fleet of human volunteers toward a world that everyone agreed was already lost. Then come, I said, but I should warn you, where we are going, the odds are very bad. He almost smiled. I had never seen a Velthari smile before. Good, he said. I am beginning to understand that with your people. That is precisely the point. The world was called Kethra, and the moment we dropped out of the dark above it, I knew the numbers had been right. We could not win here. We could only choose how we lost. Kethra was a Velthari colony, blue and gold and beautiful, with 4 million living souls spread across its single great continent. The Concord had crossed it off their list weeks ago, too far out, too close to the path of the Dark Fleet. Not worth the ships it would take to save it. They had sent word to the colony to prepare their own sleeping arcs and save what few they could, and then they had turned their attention to worlds they still believed could be kept. We arrived with 200 ships, freighters and mining vessels and old liners, every one of them packed with human volunteers who had never fought a real war in their lives. Against us, the long-range scans were already showing the leading edge of the Devourer Armada, a wave of dark vessels so vast that our screens could not hold all of them at once. I stood on the bridge of a converted ore hauler that the volunteers had renamed, with grim human humor, The Last Stand. Ruth Daly had the helm. Vorik stood beside me, very still, watching the dark wave grow on the screen. "The Velthari on the surface have been signaling us," Ruth said. "They want to talk to whoever is in charge." "Put them through," I said. The face that appeared was a Velthari elder, her glass skin lined with age, her blue eyes wide with a confusion that ran deeper than fear. Her name was Sethla, and she was the leader of the colony. "Human ships," she said. "We do not understand. The Conquered told us no help was coming. They told us we were beyond saving, and now you arrive. With vessels that are not even built for battle, full of a species we barely know." She leaned closer to her screen. "Why are you here? The simulations give this world a survival chance of 2 parts in 10,000. You cannot save us. You will only die with us. Why would you do such a thing?" I had thought about how to answer that question for the entire journey to Kethra. In the end, I did not give her a grand speech. I gave her the truth, the way one of the volunteers had given it to me. "Because someone has to stand on the worlds they gave up on," I said. "And because 2 parts in 10,000 is not 0. My people have a way of talking about odds like that. We have faced them many times. We have a name for a day when the numbers say you have already lost and you decide to fight anyway." I paused. "We call it Tuesday." Sethla stared at me as though I had spoken in a language she had no words for. "That is madness," she whispered. "Yes," I agreed, "it usually is. Now listen to me carefully, because we do not have much time, and there is work to do. You are going to load every ship you have, every ark, every vessel that will fly, and you are going to fill them with your people. Your children first. We will hold the high dark above your world for as long as we can. Every hour we buy is a ship full of your people that escapes into the deep. That is the whole of our plan. We are not here to win. We are here to buy you time, and to make the cost of taking this world higher than anything the Dark Fleet has ever paid." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she bowed her head. "I do not understand your species," she said, "but I will not waste the gift. We will begin the evacuation at once." Below us, Kethra came alive. Across the great continent, ships began to rise, slow and heavy with frightened passengers, climbing toward the safety of the deep dark beyond the world, and above them, between the rising ships and the oncoming wave, 200 human volunteers in patched and ugly vessels spread themselves out in a thin and ragged line. Then the Dark Fleet arrived, and everything I thought I knew about fear was made small. They came without sound, without warning, without any signal at all. One moment the high dark was empty, and the next it was full of them, vessels black as the space between stars, shaped like nothing any living thing would build, moving with a cold and perfect order that made my chest tighten. They did not hail us. They did not pause to consider the strange little fleet in their path. They simply came on, the way water comes through a broken wall. "They are not slowing," Ruth said quietly. "They are not even looking at us. We are nothing to them. Then we will have to introduce ourselves." I said, "Send the signal. All ships. Begin." What happened next I have struggled to describe ever since, because it did not look like any battle the Concord had ever recorded. The Dark Fleet fought the way their endless history had taught them to fight. In perfect order, every move calculated, every vessel exactly where the cold logic said it should be. They had crossed the gulf between galaxies more times than anyone could count, and in all that time they had only ever faced enemies who fought the way the Concord fought. The clever way, the careful way, the way that could be counted and predicted and answered. They had never faced us. The human volunteers did not fight in formation, because most of them did not know how. They did not follow a careful plan, because there was no careful plan that could save us. Instead, they did the one thing the Dark Fleet had no answer for. They did the unexpected thing, over and over, until the cold machines that guided the Armada began, for the first time in a million years, to make mistakes. Ruth threw the last stand directly into the path of a great dark vessel that had locked onto a fleeing arc, forcing it to break away. A mining ship vented its entire load of ore into the path of an oncoming wave, a glittering cloud that scattered their careful formation into chaos. An old passenger liner, its hull already failing, drove itself straight through the heart of an enemy column, scattering them like leaves, buying 3 more arcs the seconds they needed to slip away. None of it made sense. None of it could be predicted. And that, I slowly understood, was exactly why it worked. Their movements are changing, Vorik said. He was staring at the scan display, and his glass skin had gone pale. Look, the lead vessels, they are hesitating. They are pulling back to recalculate. Elias, I have read every record the Concord possesses of these creatures. They have never hesitated, not once. In a million years, nothing has ever made them stop and think. I looked at the screen, and I saw it too. The perfect order of the Dark Fleet was cracking, just slightly, just at the edges, where our ragged, unpredictable volunteers kept doing things that no sane fleet would ever do. The machines that guided the Armada were built to defeat logic, and we were giving them no logic to defeat. We were giving them only the wild, stubborn, desperate cleverness of creatures who had decided that the worlds behind them were worth more than the fear in front of them. Below us, the arcs kept rising, one after another, full of Velthari children. They broke free of Kethra and vanished into the safety of the deep dark. Each one was 1,000 lives saved. Each one was paid for in the only currency we had. The battle lasted 11 hours. 11 hours. Against a force that the greatest minds in the galaxy had said could not be slowed by a single minute. We did not stop them. I want to be honest about that, because the truth matters more than any comfortable story. We could not stop them, and Kethra fell. By the end, our 200 ships had become a handful. Ruth Daly brought the last stand through the whole of it somehow, her hands never leaving the controls, her voice steady even when everything around us was breaking. But when the last hour came, when the Dark Fleet finally broke through our thin and ragged line and moved down to take the world, there was almost nothing left on Kethra to take. The cities were empty, the continent was still. 4 million Velthari, every soul that the Concord had crossed off their list, had risen into the dark and escaped, carried away on a tide of sleeping arcs, while a handful of human volunteers held the door open with their bare hands. We did it, Ruth said quietly, watching the last arc vanish into the safety of the deep. We got them out, all of them. I could not answer her. I was watching the Dark Fleet move over the empty world below, and I was thinking about the cost. Of the 200 ships that had come to Kethra, fewer than 40 remained to pull back into the deep dark. The rest were gone, and the people aboard them were gone, and they had spent the last hours of their lives doing the one thing my species had always done, and the galaxy had always laughed at. They had stood in front of something too big to stop, and they had refused to step aside. Vorik turned to me on the bridge of the last stand. There were no words in any language for the look on his face. In all the history of the Concord, he said slowly, no force has ever made the Devourers withdraw to recalculate. No species in a million years has ever cost them 11 hours for a single world, and you did it with freighters, with farmers and engineers and people who had never seen a battle. He shook his head. When the recordings of this day reach the Concord, no one will laugh, not ever again. He was right. I learned later what happened in the Great Hall when the footage from Kethra arrived. I learned that 300 species watched in total silence as a fleet of human volunteers in patched and ugly ships made the unstoppable Armada. Stop and think. I learned that when it was over, no one spoke for a very long time. The galaxy had laughed at our legends because they thought our legends were about winning. They were watching now, for the first time, what our legends had always truly been about. Not victory. Something harder than victory and far more rare. The choice to stand between the dark and the things you love, even when the counting is finished and the answer is no. We limped back into the deep dark with our handful of surviving ships, carrying our grief and our exhaustion, and the names of the people we had lost. We had not saved Kethra. The world was gone. But 4 million living souls were alive in the deep who would have been lost, and somewhere out there, the most feared force in the history of the galaxy had paused, for the first time in a million years. Because a young and foolish species had refused to understand that it was supposed to lie down and die. I stood on the bridge and watched the stars, and I knew that nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The message from the Concord arrived 3 days after Kethra, and it was not a question, it was a summons. For 30 years, humanity had begged for the attention of the great old species. Now suddenly, they could not get enough of us. The summons ordered me to return to the Great Hall at once, and it carried the personal mark of Ultherin, the chief strategist of the Dre, the cold being who had told a silent room that 9 million simulations all ended the same way. I did not want to go. I was tired in a way I did not have words for. I wanted to stay with the survivors of Kethra, with Ruth Daly and the handful of others who had come through that long battle, and grieve for the ones we had lost. But Vorik put his hand on my shoulder, in the human way he had learned to do, and told me that this was the moment everything had been building toward. They did not call you to thank you, he said. They called you because they are afraid, and because, for the first time in their long lives, they do not understand something. You are about to walk into a room full of this most powerful being in the galaxy, and every one of them is going to look to you for an answer. Do not waste it. So I went. The Great Hall was full when I arrived, fuller than I had ever seen it. Every delegate was present, and this time, when I climbed onto the platform where they had laughed at me twice before, the silence that greeted me was so complete that I could hear the soft hum of the floating seats. Ultherin floated above the chamber, and its cold eyes were fixed on me. "Human," it said. "We have studied the recordings from Kethra. We have studied them for 3 days without rest. We have fed them into our machines and asked our machines to explain what happened, and, for the first time in the history of the Dre, our machines have failed to give us an answer." It paused, and there was something in its cold voice that I had never heard before. Something close to humility. "You did the impossible. We need you to tell us how." I looked out at the 300 species, at all the great and ancient minds that had spent 30 years treating my world as a joke, now waiting on my every word. And I understood that this was the true turning point. Not Kethra. This. The moment the galaxy stopped laughing and started listening. "I will tell you how," I said. "But first you have to understand something, and it is going to be hard for you to hear, because it goes against everything your kind has ever believed. You have been studying the wrong thing. You keep asking your machines to explain the tactics, the ramming, the ore clouds, the ships that drove themselves through enemy lines. But the tactics were never the point. The tactics were just what came out the other side." "Then what was the point?" Ultherin asked. "The point," I said, "is that the Devourers win by being perfect predators of perfect prey. For 1,000,000 years, every species they have faced has fought the same way you fight. The clever way, the careful way, the way that always, in the end, chooses survival over sacrifice. Their machines are built to predict exactly that. They model their enemy, they calculate the most logical response, and they are always right, because their enemy is always logical." I leaned forward. "We are not logical, not in the way they understand. When a human pilot at Kethra threw her ship into the path of an enemy vessel to save an ark full of strangers, there was no logic in it that the Devourers could read. There was no calculation that ended with her own survival. And because they could not predict it, they could not defend against it. We are the one thing in this galaxy their machines cannot count. We are the variable they have never seen." A murmur ran through the hall. I could see it landing, see the great minds turning it over, see them beginning to understand. "Your legends," Vorik said from his seat, and the whole hall turned to him. "I told you the first day that they were not jokes. I was wrong only in how I said it. They are not stories, they are instructions." He rose to his feet. 10,000 years of human history, and what is it? It is a record. A record of their species facing impossible odds and refusing to break. A library of every trick a cornered creature can use against something larger than itself. They have been carrying the answer to the Devourers in their songs and their tales since before they left their own world, and they did not even know it. And we laughed at it. We laughed at the only weapon in this galaxy that works. Ultherin was silent for a long time. When it finally spoke, its cold voice was very quiet. "You are saying that the thing we mocked you for is the thing that may save us all." "I am saying," I answered, "that you spent your whole history learning how to survive, and we spent ours learning how to refuse to die. They are not the same thing, and right now only one of them is any use to you." What happened next? No one in the history of the Concord could have predicted. The great old species, the ones who had treated my world as a joke for 30 years, voted to place a human at the head of a joint command, not as an equal, as the teacher. They were asking us, the youngest and weakest species in the galaxy, to teach them how to fight. It was the strangest thing I have ever done. Standing before war leaders who were thousands of years old, beings who commanded fleets that could shatter worlds, and trying to teach them something that no human had ever needed to be taught, because it was simply written into who we were. I taught them to be unpredictable. I taught them that a plan the enemy can read is a plan the enemy can beat, and so sometimes the best plan is to throw the plan away. I taught them feints, false retreats, sacrifices that bought time, all the desperate cleverness of creatures who had spent their whole hulsish outmatched. And hardest of all, I taught them the thing that lay underneath all of it. I taught them to be brave the human way. That was the part they could not understand at first. The great species had always believed that courage came from strength. That you were brave because you knew you could win. I had to teach them the opposite. I had to teach them that real human courage was being terrified the entire time and doing the thing anyway. That every pilot at Kethra had been afraid. That fear was not the absence of courage, but the very thing courage was made to overcome. The Concord had spent 1,000,000 years trying to remove fear from their calculations. I taught them to keep the fear and fight through it, because that, in the end, was the only kind of courage that worked against a thing that could not be beaten by logic alone. It was slow, it was hard. The great species had 1,000,000 years of careful habit to unlearn, but they learned. Species who outgunned us 1,000-fold sat and listened to human volunteers, to freight captains and engineers and ordinary people, explain how to fight like a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. Ruth Daly, who 6 months before had been hauling ore between dead rocks, found herself teaching battle tactics to a war leader of the Seine who had commanded fleets before humans had learned to write. And it worked. The first time a combined Concord force used what we had taught them, they were defending a small mining world, far out on the rim. They did not fight in their careful formations. They fought wild and unpredictable, the human way. And for the first time the Dark Fleet found itself facing an enemy it could not read. The Concord force did not win in the old sense, but they held the world. They drove the Dark Vanguard back to recalculate, just as we had at Kethra, and this time, it was not human volunteers in patched freighters. It was a real fleet, armed with real weapons, fighting with a human heart. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any signal. World after world the Concord began to hold, not everywhere, not always. We still lost more than we won, but for the first time since the Dark Fleet had appeared on the rim, the great certainty had cracked. The machines that had run 9 million simulations and found extinction in everyone had been wrong, because they had never once modeled a galaxy that fought the way humans fight. Vorik and I stood together in the command center one night, watching the great map of the war, the worlds lit in colors that showed who held what. There were more lights holding now than there had been a month before. "We are doing it," he said softly. "We are actually doing it. A month ago, every mind in the Concord agreed we were already dead. And now look, I should have felt only joy. But there was a cold weight in my chest that would not lift, and I had learned to trust that weight. "Vorik," I said, "look at the Dark Fleet. Look at how it is moving now." He looked. For a moment he did not understand. Then I watched the understanding hit him, and his glass skin went pale. For 1,000,000 years, the Devourers had moved in one direction only, forward, through a galaxy in a straight and patient line, taking everything in their path and moving on. They had never turned. They had never changed course. They were not the kind of thing that chased. They were the kind of thing that simply arrived. But now, on the great map, the leading edge of the Dark Fleet was no longer moving in a straight line. It was turning. Slowly, vast and certain. The endless Armada was changing its course, gathering itself, aiming itself at a single point. And I knew with a cold and terrible certainty what that point was before the machines confirmed it. "They have noticed us," I said. "For 1,000,000 years. Nothing has ever fought back hard enough to make them change their path, and now something has. They are not just taking the galaxy anymore. They are hunting the thing that hurt them. They are tracing it back to its source." I looked at Vorik. "They are turning toward the one world that taught the whole galaxy how to fight." He stared at the map, at the dark tide gathering itself and turning, and he understood. "Earth," he whispered. "Earth," I said. We had done the impossible. We had taught the galaxy to stand, and the galaxy had begun to hold, and in doing so we had made ourselves matter for the first time in our short history among the stars. But mattering has a price. We had hurt the unstoppable thing badly enough that it had finally noticed us, and now all of its endless attention, all of that dark and patient hunger, was turning toward a single small blue world. We had become the target. I looked at the map for a long time. Then I straightened, and I felt something settle in my chest that was not fear, though the fear was there too. It was the same thing every human had felt at Kethra, the same thing in every story the galaxy had ever laughed at. The thing that came after the counting was finished, and the answer was no. "Then we go home," I said. "Whatever is coming, it is coming to Earth, and I am not going to let my world face it alone." Vorik turned from the map to look at me, and then, slowly, deliberately, he did something I had never seen a Velthari do. He stood the way a human stands when a human has made up their mind, shoulders back, chin up, ready. "You will not face it alone," he said. "Not this time. The galaxy laughed at your legends, Elias Vance, and then your legends saved us all. We will not forget that. When the Dark Fleet reaches your world, it will not find one small species standing in its path." His blue eyes burned. "It will find every world you bled for standing behind you." I wanted to believe him. With all my heart, I wanted to believe him. But I had learned the hard way that words spoken in a safe command center are not the same as ships arriving when the dark closes in. The endless Armada had turned toward Earth, and in 40 years of warning, all of it had come down to this. We were about to find out whether the galaxy had truly learned what we had tried to teach it, or whether, when the final hour came, humanity would stand alone after all. The Dark Fleet reached the edge of our solar system, and for the first time in the history of my species, every human being alive looked up at the same sky and saw the same shadow falling across the stars. I was on the bridge of the last stand, the old ore hauler that had somehow survived Kethra and every battle since. Ruth Daly had the helm, the way she always did now. Vorik stood beside me. And around us, gathered in the high dark above Earth, was every ship humanity had ever built. Every freighter and liner and mining vessel and the handful of true warships the Concorde had helped us construct in the years of the war. It was the largest fleet our species had ever assembled. It was nothing against the thing now entering our solar system. It was a single candle held up against the night. The dark fleet came on the way it always came, silent and endless and certain. But it was different now, and the difference was the most frightening thing of all. For a million years the Devourers had moved through the galaxy, without ever truly noticing the things they consumed. Now for the first time, the whole vast armada was focused. Every dark vessel was aimed at us, at this one small world, with the cold and total attention of something that had finally found the thing that dared to hurt it. Long-range scans are complete, Ruth said quietly. Elias, it is the whole armada, not a vanguard, not a wave, all of it, everything they have. They have stopped taking the galaxy. They have come here to finish us first. I looked at the dark tide spreading across the edge of our system, and I felt the full weight of what we had done. We had made ourselves matter, and this was the price. The unstoppable thing had turned its entire endless self toward our home. How long? I asked. They will reach Earth in 6 hours, Ruth said. 6 hours. I thought of all the years that had brought us here. The laughter in the Great Hall on my first day, the 9 million simulations, the volunteers who had filled my screen with a single question, the long 11 hours above Kethra, the slow, hard work of teaching a galaxy to be brave. All of it, every step, had led to these final 6 hours above the only world that had ever been my home. I keyed the channel that would carry my voice to every ship in our fleet, to every human alive on Earth below, and I did not give them a grand speech, because I had learned by now that my people did not need one. This is Elias Vance, I said. Most of you know the story by now. 40 years ago, the galaxy laughed at us. They said our legends were jokes. They said we did not know how to count. They said that when something too big to fight came for us, we would do the sensible thing and lie down. I paused. We are about to show them, one more time, exactly how wrong they were. Whatever happens in the next 6 hours, remember this. Every world we ever bled for, every life we ever saved, every story we ever carried, it all comes down to us, here now. We do not run, we never have. Stand with me. The answer came back from 1,000 ships at once, and it was not a cheer. It was something quieter and far stronger. It was the steady, simple sound of a whole species saying yes. Then the dark fleet entered our system, and the final hour began. I want to be honest about how it started, because the truth matters more than comfort. It started badly. The Armada was beyond anything we had faced. Beyond Kethra, beyond every battle of the long war, they had learned. After all the worlds where we had bloodied them, the cold machines that guided the dark fleet had studied us, and they had adjusted, and the unpredictable human way of fighting did not surprise them the way it once had. They came on, and our fleet, our brave and ragged fleet, began to bend before them. They are pushing through, Vorik said, watching the line waver. Elias, they have adapted. The tricks that worked at Kethra, they are reading them now. Then we give them new tricks, I said. Ruth, signal the second formation. The one we never used. The one we held back for exactly this. We had saved a few things. Tactics so strange, so wasteful. So far outside any logic that we had never dared to use them, saving them for a moment when nothing else was left. This was that moment. We threw the whole strange playbook at the dark fleet at once. Every desperate idea our volunteers had dreamed up over years of war. And for a while it worked. The line steadied. The dark fleet hesitated. We held, but we could not hold forever. There were simply too many of them. Slowly, terribly, our fleet was pushed back, ship by ship, toward the small blue world we were sworn to protect. I watched the line bend, and begin to break, and I understood that we had done everything we could do, and it had not been enough. The thing was simply too big. We had taught the galaxy to stand, and now we were going to fall alone, the way some quiet part of me had always feared we would. And then the stars behind the dark fleet began to fill with light. At first I did not understand what I was seeing. Points of light, more and more of them, appearing in the dark beyond the Armada, behind the enemy, between the Devourers and the deep galaxy they had come from. I thought my eyes were failing me. I thought it was some new horror of the dark fleet. Then Ruth Daly made a sound I had never heard her make, a sound caught between a laugh and a sob, and she pointed at the screen with a shaking hand. Ilias, she whispered. Look at them. Look at who is coming. They came out of the deep dark in their thousands, and then their tens of thousands, a fleet beyond anything I had ever imagined, and they came from every corner of the galaxy at once. The great warships of the Dre, perfect and gleaming, the mine ships of the Sanet, ancient beyond counting, the glass vessels of the Velthari, and behind them 100 species more, every world we had ever stood for, every people we had ever saved, every life that had escaped into the deep while humans held the door. They had not forgotten, they had come. The galaxy that had laughed at our legends had arrived to stand inside one. A single channel opened to the last stand, cutting through the chaos, and the face that appeared on my screen was one I knew. It was Sethla, the elder of Kethra, the leader of the colony we had failed to save and whose 4 million souls we had carried into the dark. She was older now, and there was a fire in her glass eyes that had not been there on the day she called us mad. "Human ships," she said, and her voice carried across the whole fleet. 40 years ago, you came to a world the galaxy had given up on, and you asked us nothing in return. You said someone had to stand on the worlds they abandoned. You said 2 parts in 10,000 was not 0. She lifted her chin. "We remember. All of us, every world you ever bled for, we remember, and now the dark has come for the world that taught us how to stand." Her voice rose, and the whole gathered galaxy seemed to rise with it. "We have come to stand at your Thermopylae, Elias Vance. We have come to keep your promise with you." I could not speak. After 40 years, after all the laughter and all the loss, I could not find a single word. Beside me, Vorik put his hand on my shoulder, and his glass skin was lit gold in the light of the gathered fleet. "You told them what your legends meant," he said softly. "Now watch them prove they understood." And then the galaxy attacked. The Dark Fleet, for the first time in a million years, found itself caught between 2 forces at once. Our battered fleet before them and the gathered might of 300 species behind. And the gathered galaxy did not fight in the old careful way. They fought the way we had taught them. They fought wild and unpredictable and brave, every species using the desperate clever tricks we had carried in our legends for 10,000 years. And the cold machines of the Dark Fleet, which had finally learned to read the human way of war, now faced that same wild courage coming at them from 300 different directions at once. It was more than their machines could count. I will not pretend the final hours were easy, or that they were won without cost. They were not. We lost ships in that battle, and we lost people, friends I had fought beside since the first dark day above Kethra. The Dark Fleet did not break quickly. It had crossed the gulf between galaxies more times than any mind could hold, and it did not know how to do anything but come on. But for the first time in its endless existence, it faced something it could not consume. It faced a galaxy that had learned to refuse, every world standing together, coordinated by a species that treated hopeless odds as nothing more than a place to begin. In the last hour, the Dark Fleet did the thing it had never once done in a million years of crossing the dark. It broke. The cold, perfect order that had carried it from galaxy to galaxy came apart, scattered by an enemy it could not predict and could not count and could not defeat. And when the order broke, the endless armada that had terrified the oldest species in existence turned and scattered and fled back into the deep dark between the galaxies. Away from the one galaxy that had refused to lie down and be taken. It was over. We had won, not just held, not just bought time. Won. The thing that 9 million simulations had called unstoppable was fleeing into the dark. And behind it stood a galaxy that would never be the same. The cost reached me even in that moment of victory. The last stand had carried us through Kethra and every battle since, but it did not carry us through the last hour. In the final push, holding the line so others could break through, the old ore hauler, that a freight captain had named, with grim human humor, gave everything it had left. Ruth Daly brought as many of us off her as she could before the end. She did not come herself. She stayed at the helm, the way she always had, holding the ship steady to the very last so the rest of us could reach the escape craft. The woman, who had been the first to arrive at the staging point all those years ago, who had said she was exactly the right kind of person for a job nobody counted on, was the last to leave the fight. She did not leave it at all. I have never stopped carrying her name. I carry all their names. They are written now in the archives of 300 worlds. Beside the old legends they died to prove true. I am an old man now as humans count age. My years are nearly finished, and I have spent the last of them watching a galaxy remade. The Concord is not what it was. Human history is required learning now, on 300 worlds, in 300 forms of speech. The children of species 10,000 years old learn the names of our small stand at Kethra, of the freight captain at the helm of the last stand, of the long hard years when a young and foolish species taught the galaxy how to be brave. The legends the galaxy once laughed at are studied now in the great halls where I was once the entertainment. Last year, they asked me to speak one final time before the new Concord, in the same great hall where it all began. The hall was full, the way it had been on the day the Dark Fleet first appeared on the rim. Every species was present, and when I climbed onto the platform, the silence that greeted me was not the silence of beings waiting to laugh. It was the silence of beings waiting to learn. I looked out at all of them, at the glass and the metal, and the strange, beautiful shapes of 300 kinds of life, and I thought of the young ambassador, who had stood in this same spot 40 years before and let them laugh at everything his people were. When I first stood here, I told them, you laughed at our legends. You thought they were stories about the past. You thought they were the songs of a species that could not count, looking backward at old glories that no longer mattered. I let the words settle into the silent hall. But our legends were never about the past. We did not carry them to remember what we had been. We carried them to promise what we would always be. Every story you laughed at was a promise that when the dark came, we would stand. A promise that no odds were too long and no cause was too lost. A promise that we would never ever lie down. I looked out at the gathered galaxy, at every world we had bled for, at every species that had come at the last to stand inside our legend with us. You laughed at our promises, I said, because you did not yet know what we already knew. And so let me tell you the last thing my people have to teach the stars. The thing underneath all the others, the thing that turned a joke species into the keepers of this whole galaxy. I felt my voice grow strong, the way it had on the worst and best days of my life. Humanity keeps its promises. The hall did not laugh. The hall rose to its feet. 300 species, standing together in the place where they had once mocked the youngest among them, and the sound they made was not laughter, and it was not silence. It was the sound of a galaxy that had finally learned to stand.